I'm late. I was at a press conference that was called to discuss the presidential candidate's recent comments about acknowledging the fact that President Barack Obama is indeed an American. Couldn't leave it at that, though. He had to lie about something, and we had to call him out. I'm delighted to be here, and I thank you for being here today. I think we're going to have a very robust discussion about very important issues that affect all communities, but particularly and disproportionately, I think, affect the African American community. This whole notion of for-profit prisons and the privatization of core criminal justice services is just about as wrong-headed as we possibly could go. I have a friend in this room that I'm only going to keep for a minute. He said, I only come in if you make me, so he's here. I don't know what to tell you. But it is Congressman Cedric Richmond from Louisiana, and he has been working very hard on, could you let him know where you are? He's been working very hard. Could you acknowledge that this young, dynamic congressman is here on issues, working very hard on issues of criminal justice reform, and is certainly very interested in what happens when individuals are incarcerated and what's the expectation for them and what's the experience with them. And I look forward to working with him even as we move into, God willing, the next Congress on legislation that really represents reform. And that endeavor is just so complex. What we're going to consider today is just one aspect of making the system better. We know that if you're a for-profit, you're about profit. You're about minimizing your costs. You're about maximizing your profit, and you will do whatever you have to do in order to do that. The result of that is that whoever's in your care gets the minimal that is necessary for them to meet whatever standards should but may not even exist. Now, I'm very happy that the President's administration has announced that it will no longer use for-profit prisons to incarcerate individuals. I hope that the whole issue of incarceration, the numbers shrink considerably with other reform initiatives that we will undertake. But I want to make sure that the good thing that President Barack Obama is doing here is codified. That the next president, although I know she won't do that, maybe the president after her might do that, but no president will be able to revisit the using of for-profit entities for both incarceration in prison environments or in the community. Our system, once it captures our individuals because of mistakes that they have made, our system should address rehabilitation, bringing them ready to come back into society, to take on full citizenship. So we ought to be interested in what happens when they're incarcerated. They need to be educated. They need to be literate. They need to have good health care. They need to have their issues addressed. They need behavior modification. They need training on marketable skills. If we have to incarcerate people in the United States of America, we need to do it with the intention of having those individuals come back into our system and be good citizens and not have to depend upon the largesse of the system to take care of their needs. So I've introduced a bill that I'm just going to run through really, really quickly because we're a little over time here. And it's called the Justice to End For-Profit Prisons of 2016. I want you to take a look at that. It's not the only answer to this. It will work in consort with some other things that some of my colleagues have in the pipeline as well. But it would prohibit the Bureau of Prisons from continuing to, and the United States Marshal Service from contracting with for-profit parties for core correctional services, for community confinement facilities, and it will require the Bureau of Prisons to study the decrease in prison population on an ongoing basis and to break those demographics down so we know what's happening with the populations that have been most affected. This is just one aspect what we should be doing. We need to do things like make sure when our folks are incarcerated, they're able to connect with their families, and that there's no for-profit corporation making money off of that telephone call. That when our parents, our families put money into the commissaries on behalf of our family members who are incarcerated, that there's not a charge associated with that, and that if there's something left over in their accounts, that they're even charged to have that transferred. We got to make sure that when they leave with information that they need with regarding to health care and with regarding to services. And we need to make sure that if their issues are drug related, they're not prohibited from using the services of the system to get a leg up. We've got a terrific panel that's here. I'm so glad that Sushama Austin Connor is here to facilitate my second panel at the ALC. But these are amazing, hardworking people who are dedicated to the prospect of human dignity for all. And those who are least among us need those voices to be strong. So Mayor Ras Baraka from the largest city in the state of New Jersey, and for every single one of you who give of your time and your intellect, which is very important in this presidential election, intellect, temperament and commitment to this issue, I want to thank you for taking your time to do that. I'll turn it over to Sushama.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. As she mentioned, my name is Sushama Austin Connor, and I'm just pleased to be here for the second time for Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman's second panel at the CBC. So how's everybody doing? Good. So we are running behind, so I won't talk too much, but I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping details, share how the afternoon will go. Do a brief intro of the wonderful panelists that we have, and then we'll get started with their presentations. So basically, the panelists will do a 5 or so minute presentation that we've asked them to prepare. We'll do a Q&A where I will ask questions, but more importantly, you will have a chance to ask questions. I see that we don't have mics, so when that moment comes to ask questions, if you can please. You do mic? Yeah, woo. Okay, so we do have mics. So when that time comes, just raise your hand and we will bring it around kind of Oprah style. Then Congresswoman will come back to close us out. So in this age of social media, you'll see that I have my tablet. I'm not just surfing the web. I actually am going to be tweeting as people are talking. So we encourage you to do the same. On the first page of your program, everyone's Twitter handle is there, so we encourage you to tweet, share what we're doing, share your comments, and just be really interactive. This is also being live streamed. Our hashtag is Justice Not Profits, so it's hashtag Justice Not Profits. If you search Bonnie Watson Coleman in Facebook, you will be able to get onto her Facebook page, and her Twitter handle is @RepBonnie. So let's talk about our illustrious panel. The Honorable Ras Baraka, who is the mayor of the city of Newark, New Jersey. The Honorable, and I'll read them as they are in the program, the Honorable Julissa Ferreras Copeland, who is the council member from the New York City Council. Don Cravens Jr., who is the Senior Vice President for Policy and Executive Director at the National Urban League. Judith Brown Dianis, who is the Executive Director of the Advancement Project. J. David Cox, National President of the American Federation of Government Employees. Michael Skolnick, who is a civil rights activist and CEO of SOZE. Carl Takei, who is staff attorney at the ACLU National Prison Project. And LaShawn Y. Warren, Esquire, Vice President and General Counsel for the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. So, without further ado, if each of you, instead of me reading your bio, if you would say a few things about yourself before your presentation, and then we can start right here with Mayor Baraka. And why don't we give them a hand for just for coming? Thank you so much.
especially if this is. Thank you. We on? I don't think it's on. You hear it?
You're on.
Okay. So I just want to thank the Congresswoman first, Bonnie Watson Coleman, for allowing me the opportunity to be on this panel, but also having a panel so important as this. And we thank you for the work that you're doing for the state of New Jersey down here in D.C., for being a fighter for us and for rights and things that we need back home in the city of Newark. So we thank you for being at the forefront of issues like this. I'm the mayor of the city of Newark, the largest city in the state of New Jersey, as was said. Some people may argue with that, but it's still a fact today. I've been the mayor there for about 2.5 years now, and I've been in politics and community activism around issues like this for over 20 years. So it is important that we talk about this topic, and I would like to actually begin where I think the foundation for all of this comes from, and that's the 13th Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. So the 13th Amendment basically says that slavery and involuntary servitude is illegal unless you've been convicted of a crime. And that sets the floor for what we call today as the prison industrial complex. It actually created an opportunity for people to begin to make profit off of the idea that people were incarcerated, that you can actually not pay or give people slave wages in order to make profit. Out of that came the crop lien system right after the Civil War that existed, and some people may think it went out in 5 years, 10 years, but this existed all the way up to the 1930s, right? So all the way up to the 1930s, you had this kind of crop lien system where people actually worked for cotton farmers for food, for housing, for clothes, tenant farmers and sharecroppers who actually worked in the crop lien system for actually nothing for a very, very long time. And, African Americans always have this story, before you might be sons and daughters of sharecroppers, not just sons and daughters of slaves, because sharecropping came right after that. And if you look at today, there are more African Americans in jail today than there were slaves at the height of slavery and in the Civil War. So obviously, it has been changed from slavery to a prison industrial complex where we are, and that people are making enormous amounts of profit off of people based on their race and their class. So there are hundreds and thousands, millions, I should say, 2 million or more prisoners in the United States who are actually being exploited in this system, for all kinds of things. And we talked about that in terms of phones, in terms of food, in terms of clothes, commissary. The bail is associated with that, and later on, hopefully we can talk about bail reform and how that's related to the cities and municipalities like Newark and the things that we're trying to do around bail reform, the positive and negative effects that they actually have on cities. That is going to have on cities like Newark as it relates to crime, as it relates to families, as it relates to stability. Hopefully we get to talk about that, because I think this is very poignant in this argument that we're making around trying to get rid of privatization in prisons. The last piece I want to talk about, I know, is the president, because of Walnut Grove and the closing down of that prison in Mississippi, pushed this thing now where there's no more privatization. Well, we're trying to have no more private prisons, as the Congresswoman said, but ultimately there's still firms that are going to be able to get contracts to manage public prisons, still get contracts, and I heard her talk about her bill, hopefully that it is attacking that, to manage private prison, public prisons, but also all of the goods and services that it takes to run a prison are private. Whether you're talking about electricity to water, to commissary, to food, to phones, to the phone cards, everything is for profit, and people will make money off of incarceration. And the real problem with this is that the majority of the people in prison are poor. Not only are they poor, most of them are in prison for non-violent offenses. So then we have to begin to ask ourselves, is the prison system actually working to put the most violent and the most dangerous people away, or is it an opportunity to continue to enslave whole sections of a society and then use that society use that section to begin to create profit from them for private companies and industry? So hopefully we get to discuss that a lot more today. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Judith Brown Dianis, and I'm Executive Director of Advancement Project. We are a national racial justice organization based here in DC, and we work with grassroots movements across the country on a range of issues, including the school-to-prison pipeline. We are part of the movement for Black Lives. We also work on voting rights issues and issues that are kind of the heart of what communities of color are concerned about. So I want to, just pick up on the mayor's part about the 13th Amendment and just think about the fact that when we instituted this failed system of criminal justice and the failed war on drugs, we should have known that in an instant that in a capitalistic society, that there would be those who would figure out how to make money off of it. That's what we do in America, is figure out how to make money. And so in that, there were those who decided that they could make money off of making people commodities. Actually, our country was based off of that also, right? Slavery was about making people, black bodies in particular, commodities, and we have continued on that path, and maybe we don't have necessarily chains, but we have cages instead. And so when we think about making money off of bodies, part of what we have seen is a system that not only creates how we can get paid, but then how we can keep that money coming. Because just imagine that somebody said to you, well, you're making money one day, and by the way, we're going to change up the rules and the policy so you can't get that check any longer. And that, in fact, we've done away with that job, we've done away with that industry. You would figure out if you had a hell of a lot of money to the tune of $3.3 billion that just 2 companies in this field of for-profit prisons have, that you would figure out how to use your money to keep your power and keep your money. And so we start with making the money, but then we figure out how we reinvest those revenues as a capitalist company that's making money off of bodies to keep the bodies coming. And so keeping the bodies coming means not only lobbying Congress and state officials and making towns actually think like this is the only industry that you have. You don't have cotton plantations no more. Yeah. You don't have soy any longer. You don't have farms any longer because we got rid of those through all those loans that we screwed up to black farmers, so y'all ain't got nothing. So you can have a prison.
Yeah.
For some communities, we also have some casinos.
Right.
And if we could connect the casinos and the prisons, then we're really good. And so prisons become the hope for towns that have no hope. And they don't realize sometimes that, in fact, they have bought into a system of commodifying black and brown bodies. And so not only do we see those companies then move to lobbying, but beyond lobbying, there is putting money into candidates. That's right. So people like Senator Marco Rubio gets money from these companies. In Florida, the juvenile detention centers are run by for-profit companies. Right. And so they've got to be able to put money into candidates to make sure that the status quo for them is the status quo and they continue to get paid. Right. And so it becomes this continuous cycle of how do we keep making money off of black and brown bodies. And one of the areas where we also see it is in people in the groups that are most vulnerable. So there's black folks, but there's immigration detention centers also. So there's actually in federal law a mandate of 34,000 beds be filled daily in this country for immigrant detention centers. So if you have a quota, then you got to figure out how to fill the beds. And so then you start to put in place immigration practices that are beyond what your actual policies are. So those people who haven't committed necessarily the worst of crimes, but who are undocumented, maybe came here as refugees, looking for a better world and actually escaping all kinds of gang and political violence in their countries, get swept up in this, so much so that we actually have families that are living in detention centers in this country. And so part of what we've got to be moving to do is to figure out, how do we shut this down? How do we cut off the lifeline of money off of our bodies? How do we make sure that we're not peeled against each other in terms of immigration communities and undocumented folks and black folks, because we're both commodities in that system, right? And how do we also make sure that when politicians are taking money from these jokers, that we know and we hold them accountable? So I'll stop there. Thanks.
So good afternoon. My name is LaShawn Warren. I am the Vice President and General Counsel for the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, located obviously in New Jersey, in Newark, the fine city of Newark. For the New Jersey Institute, we are a social justice advocacy think tank, and we work on a variety of different issues, and our issues really focus on three pillars primarily: economic mobility, civic engagement, and also criminal justice. And with those issues, what we try to do is we work using many tools of advocacy, legislative advocacy, litigation, public education, in order to knock down structural barriers that prevent people from realizing their potential. So that, in a nutshell, is basically the Institute. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman has been a strong ally of the Institute. She is a pioneer in the criminal justice space in New Jersey. And her work has really served as a model for the nation, and so we are honored to be a part of this particular discussion. So I think that there's been a lot that has been said. And you know, when you talked about sharecroppers, it's interesting. It just brought back a flood of memories, particularly with my mom. My grandparents actually were sharecroppers. I'm originally from Savannah, Georgia, and there were so many stories that they talked about with respect to the experiences they had in terms of economic mobility and the ability to actually achieve pretty much anything. They were one of the few families that actually was able to gain enough income to actually buy off their property, and that was very unusual in that time. And so I love the frame that has been laid out with respect to these issues, because I think private prisons, they are part of a much broader conversation. So generally speaking, when we think about issues like mass incarceration, when we think of racial profiling, when we think of mandatory minimums, when we think of a series of these issues, we generally think of them in silos, but there is interconnectivity between all of them. And I think it's important to understand that this system that we're talking about, and I think everyone has really alluded to this, it really perpetuates an unfair and unjust system. And the system is based on racial inequities, and it dehumanizes black and brown people. And it's not just it's not generally black and brown people, but black and brown women, men, and children. And I really want to focus my remarks primarily on children, but I'll get to that in just a second. I think that the private prison industry is unique in the sense that it really does straddle the continuum. If we think of the continuum in terms of how people actually get into the criminal justice system from the beginning until the end, the prison industry, they basically drive policies to get more people in the system, to get them to stay in the system, and then it moves to conditions of confinement and how they're treated when they're in the system. And then there's another issue about their preparation for exiting the system. And I think the Congresswoman alluded to those particular issues, and those things that we really need to pay particular attention to. I think it's important to note that at the beginning of the 1980s, there were no adult private prisons. And the private prison industry actually coincided and exploded with mass incarceration. And so it became a feeding frenzy. And for years, organizations like the ACLU, like the NAACP, for years they raised serious concerns about the fact that private prisons would create a perverse system of incentives to incarcerate people. And indeed, that's actually what it did. And despite the warning bells. Congress proceeded, states proceeded. They expanded the use of private prisons, and they began implementing mandatory minimums, and they began criminalizing nonviolent offenses, particularly drug offenses, at a dizzying pace that had a disproportionate impact on people of color. And so now, I think, as most of you know, we lead the world in incarceration rates, and we incarcerate people at a dizzying pace. It actually, in the last 40 years, the percentage was 500% in the last 40 years that we have increased in terms of our incarceration rate. So in 2015, I think this case is certainly worth raising, because I think it really affirmed what advocates had been saying in terms of the perversion of these incentives to incarcerate people. And what happened in 2015, there was an 8-year scandal coming out of central Pennsylvania. And there was, the name of that scandal that most people probably know about is called Kids for Cash. And there were 2 senior judges in central Pennsylvania who took kickbacks from builders of 2 private youth prisons in Pennsylvania. And they took $2.3 million over an 8-year period in exchange for imposing harsh sentences to increase the youth prison population. And over that period of time, there were about 2,500 kids that fell prey to this particular scheme, and they were sent to prison. And I think it's interesting to just hone in on some of the violations that took place that were underlying offenses where these particular judges sent these young people to prison. They sent them to prison for trespassing in a vacant building, shoplifting a CD, and I think one of the ones that was really shocking to me was there was a young lady who had a MySpace page. She created a fake MySpace page to mock a vice principal at her school, and that alone sent her to a youth prison. And I think one of the other things that's really disturbing about the scenario is there wasn't a lot of due process in this whole process, where these kids were just being funneled into this prison system. And at the Institute, we believe that prisons are no place for kids. They should be in schools. And so one of the things that we are doing, we actually will be launching a decarceration campaign at the beginning of next year. And the idea behind the decarceration campaign really is to close youth prisons. We feel like there's no place, it's not a good place for kids to be. And instead of prisons, we should invest in infrastructure and social services that help them achieve their full potential. And so over the course of the year, we will roll out a number of alternatives to incarceration. And actually, we're participating with a program that you know well, JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. And it's driven down the numbers of young people who've been in the system. But at the same time, as the numbers have gone down, it is stark, the racial disparity. So at this point, we have about 300 young people who are entangled in the system right now. And 90% of them are African American, and maybe about 20% of that 90% are Latino young people. I remember going to visit one of the facilities, one of the secure facilities, and it was heartbreaking to see young people. There was a young kid that was probably no more than like 5'7" that was locked in a prison cell by himself. And that is no way to treat our young people. And as Jude talked about, commoditizing Black young lives is problematic, and it's something that we need to focus on and do something about. And there's no doubt that private prisons have been a major driver in funneling more and more kids and more people into the criminal justice system. And from putting on my theological hat, it's a moral issue. That's right. You know, it's something that is reprehensible. And we should do whatever we can to make sure that we alleviate the system. It's at its core, it's predatory. And there are things that we can do. And so when there's legislation that's pending, I encourage you, I know that my organization will be encouraging the general public to support the initiatives that we are putting out that will basically serve as an alternative to incarceration. They will be rehabilitative. They will give the young people the kinds of tools that they need to be successful. And on the topic of reentry, and this is the last thing I'll say, it's absolutely imperative that we treat our criminal justice system the way that a hospital would treat a patient. As soon as that patient is entered into the hospital, let's say they have surgery, there is a patient plan for when that patient leaves, to get them to the place that whenever they leave, they will be in a situation where they can take care of themselves and fend for themselves. And so just like we have a plan for the medical, in a medical context, we should also have a plan for people when they enter into the criminal justice system. If they're incarcerated, day one, there should be a plan about giving an assessment in terms of what they need in terms of training. One of the things that we have found with our juvenile justice system is there are about 40% of the young people who are locked up who have special needs. Mm-hmm. And had someone paid attention to the issues very early on, they would have never been locked up in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so I say all that to say, just like we have an exit plan for hospitals and other things, we need to have an individualized plan for every person who enters the criminal justice system. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Representative, for sponsoring this, and I'm very honored to be here. My name is Carl Takei. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU's National Prison Project, and I have a role that straddles a couple of different spaces. I'm a litigator, and I'm also a policy person, and I track the private prison industry as well as suing it. So I've been to private prisons, public prisons, and immigration detention centers around the country and seen firsthand the consequences of injecting the profit motive into the care and custody of people who are uniquely disempowered. When you are locked up inside a prison, it's bad enough if it's a public prison, because it is that, the entire structure of the institution is designed to cut off the outside world. And when you then turn that institution into a place that is designed to squeeze the maximum profit from that care and custody, you don't get care and custody, you get warehousing. You get human rights violations. That's exactly what we saw, for example, when we went into some of the private prisons that, thanks to the Justice Department's August 18th decision, are going to be shut down. There was one prison in Willacy, Texas, down near the border with Mexico, that is literally made of Kevlar tents. 200 men crammed into 200-foot-long Kevlar tents with rodents and insects crawling into the tents, toilets overflowing because they had cheaped out on supplying the sewage lines into the tents, and surrounded by barbed wire, closed out from the rest of the world where nobody could hear their complaints. They even used solitary confinement cells because they were overfilling the tents, and solitary was the place that they could use as overflow space. So people who had literally done nothing that would justify putting them in solitary confinement for weeks on end, 23 hours a day, in a cell that is the size of a parking space, because it was more economically feasible and more profitable for the company to do it that way. After we issued our report in 2014, Warehoused and Forgotten, and there are a few copies outside. The Department of Justice Inspector General issued a series of 2 reports examining these prisons. The most recent one in August 2016, just before the DOJ issued its private prisons phase-out decision, found that in one of these private prisons, they went for 8 months without a full-time physician because it was cheaper for the company to pay the understaffing penalties than to pay the salary of the physician. This is what happens when prisons run on a profit motive. But we're at an important turning point. There is the DOJ decision, which is a milestone. There are 22,000 people who, thanks to this decision, will be moved out of private prisons and put into regular prisons. There are still huge problems with that, given the number of people who are in federal custody right now, but it means that they will be in places that at least are not subject to the profit motive. And we can deal with all of the sentencing questions and all of the reasons why people are inappropriately going into prison and staying in prison too long. But that in itself is a significant improvement. It's also the biggest blow against the private prison industry in the last 15 years. I'm sure many of us on the panel cheered when we saw the stock prices of CCA and GEO dropping after this announcement. And it has opened up the possibility of the Department of Homeland Security re-examining its contracts with the private prison industry. It has opened up the possibility of states re-examining their contracts, because these are the same companies. They have the same business model. They have the same incentives across the country. And they don't really care what kind of body is filling their beds, as long as the money and the bodies are flowing in. And this points also to the fact that even though we are in this moment of great possibility and a series of recent victories, including Walnut Grove also in Mississippi, which was a case that a number of my ACLU and Southern Poverty Law Center colleagues worked on. It's the possibility also is a situation where we have to be alert to the dangers. As the Congresswoman said, the private prison industry is not just running prisons. They've also, in recent years, been reacting to all of the talk about sentencing reform and reducing the incarcerated population by buying up halfway houses, buying up supervision functions. So now CCA and GEO have major segments devoted to these community corrections segments. If we are not able to stop them, then we may end up simply shifting people from privatized prisons into privatized halfway houses and privatized supervision, where the companies will still profit from ensuring that people remain inside the system. They will still profit from exactly the thing that is not what society wants. Because for all the rest of us, the criminal justice system is something where if you end up inside of it, your engagement with the system ought to be limited. You ought to be given the resources before you are sent out the door to be able to reintegrate in your community, to build a new life. But if instead you have a vertically integrated private prison industry that runs supervision, prisons, and halfway houses, then the only way in which they won't profit is if there is some way that you successfully exit from the system, where you don't keep getting bounced from prison to halfway houses to supervision and back again. And this is something that we need to guard against as we take our next steps. And I'm incredibly glad that the Congresswoman recognizes this danger and is taking steps preemptively to prevent that.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Skolnick, and first and foremost, I am the father to a 3-year-old boy, Mateo Ali. That is my biggest job title, and I carry it with great pride. I want to pick up on something Judith said and Carl said about DHS and immigrant detention centers. My wife is an immigrant to this country. She came here when she was 2 years old, and she's a filmmaker now in profession. And she just was in McAllen, Texas last week doing a 4-part series on immigration for a website called Refinery 29, and spent the week inside a detention center in McAllen. I applaud the Department of Justice's decision to stop contracts next 5 years with private prisons. But if we look at the numbers, 8% of our federal inmates are in private prisons under DOJ supervision. 62% of immigrants who are in detention centers are in private prisons, and they're under the Department of Homeland Security. So I think, to Judith's point, I think is an important one, and I want to echo it. The idea that the undocumented people in this country are silent and scared, and they certainly need this issue to be raised as high as possible because they are being directly affected by this system. I want to say, listening to the attorney speak, there's a lot of sick things we do in this country. This is really sick. Like, this is really, I listen to your comments, like this, and I want to speak as a business person for a minute, because that's what I do in my life, is I'm in the private sector. I spent 7 years working for Russell Simmons. He was $13 million in the hole for a business that he asked me to run when I first started working for him, and I got him out. So I have some track record that there is documentation of that, Congresswoman, that we can show. There's a long form of that.
We want to see them.
See the receipts. And so I have some track record in running successful businesses, and I started a new business about 1.5 years ago with one of Judith's disciples, who now is my new boss. He is a brilliant young man who worked for me, who used to work for Judith. And I thought a lot about profit and equity, and so I decided to start a new business and create a new business with triple bottom line, and the triple bottom line economy, meaning people, planet, and profit. And so just to give you an idea of some of the things we do in our company, we have a thing called, I call them inspiration days. Every 2 weeks, I hired 15 employees in the first 6 months. I have no investment. It's us going in. In the first 6 months, everyone gets an inspiration day. Every 2 weeks, they get a day off to go be inspired. Whether that's to go to the movies, go to the theater, go to a museum, spend time with their family, with their child, what have you, on top of what they get for vacation and sick days, which we don't count. We don't count vacation days, we don't count sick days. They take them at their leisure. We have things, we do full health care. We have maternity leave for 8 months, paternity leave for 8 months. We have dental care. Right? All these things we do to take care of the people of our company. If I look at the for-profit prison industry, it's a single bottom line company, and that's it. They're looking at profit, profit, and profit. So when those stocks went down, when that announcement was made, the first thing I did, Carl, is I looked at those stocks. I said, does it, because a lot of things come out of Washington, you don't really know if they're real or if they're not real. So let's see how the market responds. 40% day one was CCA, about 30% was GEO. They dropped, right? People pulled their money out. So when I think about what's their motive as a private prison industry, as a business person, right? I'm a business person. I want to create profit, but I also want to take care of the people of our company, the people that we service. I also want to take care of the planet. Not everybody wants to do that, and that's okay. I don't judge a for-profit business who has a single bottom line if they're not housing and warehousing our people. It's okay if you're selling soda, because I can decide not to buy it or buy it. It's okay if you're selling candy, because I can tell my kid you're going to eat it or you can't eat it. But I don't have a decision when they say my loved one is being sent to that private prison. And one thing I see in your notes, Carl, I'm going to take your notes for a minute, that you didn't get a chance to speak about, but I know it's important. Because you had so many good points, and they're good notes. But they're in my notes, too. These prison contracts have a thing called a locked-up quota. When they sign a contract with the state or the feds, they have a locked-up quota. And that means they are guaranteed the money. and the bodies. At some states, 90%. In 2 states, 100%. How do we have a system that tells a prison we're going to guarantee 100% occupancy? And if we don't provide 100% of those people, we as taxpayers pay a penalty called a low crime tax. So it is not in their interest to reduce crime. It's not in their interest. As a businessman, you need product, and your product is people being locked up. So when I say it's sick, it's actually almost un-American that we have an industry that's been privatized that is against the interests of healthy and willing bodies in our communities. Completely against the interests. So my child is named after Muhammad Ali, but we have about 15 photographs of the president in his bedroom. So I want to end with some hope. Glenn Martin, I don't know if Glenn is here this weekend, but Glenn, who was formerly incarcerated in New York State, now runs an organization called Just Leadership USA. And Glenn says, those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solutions. And I met 2 young men here last year, Congresswoman, who were formerly incarcerated, who had started a new business called Pigeonly. It's pigeon.ly. Now, I have no interest in this business. I don't do business with this business. I'm just a fan of what they do. And what they've done is they have tried to break the for-profit part of prisons. And so they have created a piece of software where when you call your loved one, you're no longer using a collect phone call, you're calling under like a Skype technology. So instead of $2.70 a minute, it's 10 cents a minute. They have a technology where you can go on your phone, you take a picture of your child, or a picture of your mom, or a picture of your cousin, and you can upload that photograph to their system, and they will send that photo to the loved one who's locked up in prison for 50 cents for the first 5, and thereafter it's 50 cents for the next 20. Very cost effective. Because we know if the private prison industry interest is not to create healthy communities, is not to create low crime, right? And we know they're warehousing people hundreds of miles away from their loved ones. The only way to fight that without going to government is to keep families connected. Right, to keep children connected, as you said, Attorney, the work that you all do, to keep children connected to their families. And so this transformational company that Ben Jealous, who we all know and love, is one of the investors of his new job at KPOR, is trying to break that system. And so I think there is, as a business person in the private sector, things that we can do, right, to try to knock down this idea that we are going to make money off of our own people. And I am humbled to be part of a new company and try to create those solutions around these problems. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, to one of the finest members of the United States Congress, Congresswoman, you are the best. I'm J. David Cox with the American Federation of Government Employees, and you may say, and who is that? We are the largest federal employee union, representing about 700,000 federal government employees, including all the employees at the Bureau of Prisons, as well as VA, Social Security, most federal government agencies. We've heard a lot of my colleagues up here talk about Department of Justice and how proud we are of the statement that's been made and the direction our president is taking us to get us out federally of the for-profit prison industry and BOP. And DHS is still a whole nother ballgame. But I want to share with you a little bit. Those things don't just fall out of the sky. The president doesn't just get up one morning over at the White House and say, this is a wonderful idea, let me just make this happen, and it all falls in line. We have 2 great attorney generals to thank. Eric Holder, who worked night and day, Loretta Lynch. We have Charles Samuels, who recently retired as the director of the Bureau of Prisons, who made a very public commitment. I will not leave the federal government and go to work for a for-profit prison industry that many of his previous colleagues would not make and have gone into that industry and are making lots of money because they understand how the system works. But where I am most proud, the president of our Bureau of Prison Counsels, Eric Young, this fine young man sitting right here on the corner, a correctional officer, these good ideas start from the bottom up, from people doing the work, understanding, yes, let's get out of this for-profit prison industry. It's wrong, it's bad. There are some things in this country the government needs to do. The government is the one that's responsible for protecting society. There are people that don't live by the rules of society, and yes, they will go to prison. But we all acknowledge that the current system we have in this country is moving too many people to prison that should never be going to prison. We have entirely too many people going to prison that are African Americans. Go look at the numbers, the statistics. We've got 25% of the world's prison population. We only have 5% of the world population. And I didn't get a chance to look at Carl's notes. But this is the preacher preaching to the choir to tell this audience that the proportion of African Americans that are incarcerated in this country at all levels is way, way out of proportion to the population and to the number of African Americans. And so where we're at with AFGE, we believe, number one, human rights, civil rights, labor rights, all of those rights go together. And that clearly sentencing reform is something this country has got to do. Mandatory sentences for drug offenses, many of those type things, has created the problems in prisons that first off, we should do away with those minimum sentencing reforms. 3 strikes, you're out. The list goes on and on and on. And I want to make this very clear. This is the people that make their living working in prisons that's saying that. They work in prisons. They know the population. And Eric tells me on a daily basis, many of the people that we have incarcerated should have never been incarcerated for what they were incarcerated for. Many of them needed to go to rehab. I'm a registered nurse by profession, and I will tell you point blank that, it takes me 5 minutes in a prison to understand that we're dealing with a lot of mental illness and we are dealing with a lot of substance abuse. I personally have this very strong opinion and belief that substance abuse is an illness, and mental illness is an illness like all other illnesses, and we need to be treating it in this country. So if we would start tackling a lot of those problems, we would make it better. The for-profit prison industry, how do they make that money? They make it by paying their staff about 20% less than staff is paid in government-run prisons, either at the federal level, state level, or whatever level. They make that money by cutting back on the services, the health services, social services, the food, the environment, all of those type things. They're going to squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. Now, we all understand also, you get what you pay for. If you are not offering better wages for good quality correctional officers, people that want to get up every day, go to work, and their job happens to be in a correctional facility, to realize their job is to help behavior modification, to help with rehabilitation, to help with getting that action plan of when this person is released from prison, that they're not right back in prison a week later. I mean, that's what we got to work on, my friends, and it's very easy to, if you're just going to constantly make money, If you're in the for-profit business, you want them coming back over and over and over and over again. You want to keep making those sales. So I can tell you, from our standpoint, from our Bureau of Counsel, Prison Locals, and I commend Eric for his leadership and the strong leadership that he has given moving our correctional officers and leading our correctional officers, that we stand up strong every day for sentencing reform, for getting rid of for-profit prisons, for greater rehab services, for greater exit plans, so that we don't see the same people going back to prison, but that we also build a better and stronger America that has equality for every citizen of this country. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Julissa Ferreras Copeland, a New York City Council member. I represent the area of Queens, also known as Citi Field, USTA, and LaGuardia Airport. I just want to thank the Congresswoman for pulling us all together. So much has been said, and there's been such great information, and we're all very eager to hear from you. My perspective is one of trying to attempt solutions to some of the issues that were highlighted. About a year ago, I started a roundtable discussion around feminine hygiene products. Now, men, I know you got to sit up. Not often do we talk about this, but we're going to end the taboo of this conversation.
That's right.
But there are women that are detained, or were women that were detained in New York City prisons that unfortunately, not only did we find women that were not found guilty because they couldn't pay their bail, they were being detained at Rikers and other detention facilities, but then had to be dehumanized, treated as animals, really. Had to provide stained clothing to prove that they needed a pad or a tampon before one was provided for them. So after many conversations with the administration, we were able to include a package to provide free feminine hygiene products in all city prisons. But the reality is that only helped us better understand that many of the women that were detained had mental health issues, oftentimes could not pay their bail. Unfortunately, you go to prisons, in particular, and I saw this myself, when you went to Rikers, the women lined up waiting to go visit the men in prison. The line went around the prison. No one visited the women. There were like 3 mothers bringing children to the prison to see these women. So to think that women were relegated to their commissary to provide a product that only says that you are absolutely healthy. There is nothing sick about you when you menstruate. Yet women had to go visit doctors, they had to go see a nurse to be able to get a product that was they were given one, and oftentimes only one per day. So to be able to change that and to do that also in schools and to do that in shelters was what we did through this package. And I also am the chair of the Finance Committee, and I think that I was able to do this within a year because of that. Because when I negotiated this budget for the city of New York of $82.2 billion, and the cost to remedy this problem was $5 million. So no one could tell me, and no one could say that this city couldn't afford it. No one could say that, being dehumanized was better than investing our own taxpayer dollars to our own sisters that needed these products. And as was mentioned earlier, when we talk about immigration, my district, there's 136 languages spoken in my district. We have 70% of my constituents are foreign born. So obviously when we talk about detainees in immigration prisons, it is alarming. The conditions, it is alarming. The disconnect, oftentimes people are arrested in New York City and end up in Texas. These are families that don't have the means to provide legal counsel, because we think, oh, when you get arrested, you should get an attorney. Well, not in these cases. You only are able to be represented if your family, friend, or someone on the outside can provide attorney for you. And in New York City, under our speaker, and just last year we were able to begin a fund to be able to provide legal counsel to those detained. So it's the first ever in the nation public defender model for detained immigrants facing deportation in New York City and in some prisons that were in New Jersey. This model cost the city $7 million, which is nothing, again, when we compare it to $82 billion to be able to keep families together, to be able to bring dignity to a process that dehumanizes. Because at the end of the day, this is what this is all about. It's about taking your identity, taking the whole concept of coming to America. Nobody comes to this country, and I say this as both my parents are from the Dominican Republic, and when they came here, it is always with a dream for something better. You don't think that maybe on your way to college, you jump a turnstile, you get detained, Rikers turns you right over to ICE, and then you end up in prison for 6 months to a year without knowing when you're gonna get out. That is not what America is about. That is not an American dream. That is more of an American nightmare. And I also wanted to talk quickly about the bail fund. We created a bail fund because we also found it costs $450 per day to pay for someone who is detained in a New York City prison. We saw on average people that jumped turnstile, urinated in public, that could not pay their bail. They were in prison for up to 2 months. How is that just? How is that possible in a city that has so much wealth, or in a country? Because we're just a microcosm of what happens, on a national level. So the city created a bail fund, which is at $1.5 million, and we're looking to increase for low-level crimes that those that are detained and their families can tap in, because then we could talk about the bail fund in that industry, which is a whole other much larger and egregious conversation. But I just wanted to present to you some of the solutions that we're bringing from New York City, and hoping that many of your cities can replicate this. But we need justice for women, and justice for women starts with our health. And we are important, and we must not be doubly penalized. So if we're detained for whatever reason, don't dehumanize women by not providing them the proper access to health care. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Donald Cravens. I serve as Senior Vice President for Policy for the National Urban League, and I'm the Executive Director of our Washington Bureau. Our Washington Bureau was founded in the 1960s when Whitney Young was here working with Dr. King and many of our civil rights leaders, and figured that the National Urban League movement really needed a presence here in Washington, and we've been here ever since. It's an honor to be here, Congresswoman. I want to thank you and just thank you for your leadership on this, but a whole host of issues. Before I became Senior Vice President of Policy, in my former life, I was a legislator in the great state of Louisiana, and I worked with Congressman Richmond, who was then State Representative Richmond. And one of my biggest areas of focus was on juvenile justice issues. And I will tell you, two good things about Congressman Richmond. Don't tell him I told you. He's my friend, I'm teasing. You couldn't have chosen a smarter, more dedicated person to work with on this issue. And so I just wanted to tell you that he is a phenomenal fighter and a champion, and you couldn't have picked a better person to work with. So thank you for that. It was hard having something to talk about. It's hard after this panel, right? I mean, can we give them a round of applause? And I couldn't see Carl's notes from over here. And the councilwoman kept hers very covered. It got very competitive. But I think I do have something. I think I do have something that hasn't been said. I do want to start out with, though, it's very hard to see pictures like this. And the mayor talked about it at the very beginning. And not see how this is, and he said it's not slavery, it's worse than slavery was. This is worse than American slavery. When you look at the numbers, when you look at the fact that we have a system that from the janitor to the warden, you hope there's more people there so you can keep your job, right? And who would design a system like that? And as you said, it's sick. Un-American, but sick. Perverse, even. We at the National Urban League, we are big on reentry programs. And when we talk to our men and women who are returning citizens and they talk about what type of things can prevent recidivism, one of the things they talk about most is they'd like to be able to talk to their family when they're in prison. And so we talked a little bit about the phone rates, the fact that we were finally able to do some good in lowering some of those phone rates. A lot more needs to be done. That's why the mention of that company is important. But that didn't happen by accident. Someone had to say and finally have the leadership ability to get something done about those phone rates, because it had been spoken about for decades, for years. We knew something was wrong. It was when FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, Sister Clyburn, became the interim chair of the FCC that something finally got done. Now, that wasn't an accident that this African-American woman from South Carolina became the interim commissioner or a commissioner on the FCC. How do you think that happened? Who appoints FCC commissioners? The President of the United States. And who elects presidents of the United States in this country? African-Americans. Look at the swing states. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina. You take those votes away from President Obama's victories, our votes, African-American women's votes, there is no President Obama. There is no Michelle Mignon Clyburn. And the reason I want to talk about that, and I know you're saying, well, how does that have to deal with prison reform and justice? Because I'm tired of debating with some of my friends here this week about the importance of voting. This is ridiculous. I'm all for protesting. I am in the military. I honor anyone's right to stand or kneel or sit or do whatever they want to do. That's what I fight for. However, in addition to protesting, you got to vote. This woman wouldn't have been elected to change the things for the women who are incarcerated in New York if somebody had not gone out and voted for this woman. We wouldn't have those attorneys general that we bragged about if you didn't have a president who appointed those men, that man and that woman. You wouldn't have Bonnie Watson Coleman if we didn't go out and support her. And so look, I stand with the men and women who are on this panel. And we at the Urban League, we will do everything we can to continue dismantling that system. Congresswoman, we want to support your legislation. I would just ask one more thing that you would look into, and maybe your legislation addresses that, and that's the fact that a number of federal and state prisons as well use inmate labor to manufacture goods and services that the prisons then sell to outside companies like Walmart and Victoria's Secret and McDonald's and Nordstrom's and AT&T Wireless, just to name a few. We got to do something about that as well. And so I would ask you that you would look into that as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much. It's such a rich discussion that I think we can start from a couple of places, but why don't we give them another hand, because it's a lot and they covered a lot. I'm going to throw out the first question, but where's the mic so that we can get people thinking, thank you, about their question. And if you want to just raise your hand and let someone know that you have a question. Is Judge Stephen L. Reed still here? Did he leave? Okay, I was going to just say hello to him. Judge Stephen L. Reed, who's a probate judge from Montgomery County in Montgomery, Alabama, was here, and he's also a friend, so I wanted to just say hello. So I'm going to ask this question particularly of Carl Takei from the ACLU, but anyone jump in just to kind of get like a history and sort of a macro. How did we get here with the for-profit prisons? Just how did we get here?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with Mayor Baraka's description of the crop lien system and the convict lease system after the Civil War, where that was really the first big national experiment with locking up people and handing them over to the custody of private companies. Literally the re-enslaving of people using the loophole in the 13th Amendment for people who have been sentenced. And but then for a long time after the end of the convict lease system in the 1930s, there were not private prisons in the United States. Mm-hmm. They came back in the early 1980s because a group of 3 people founded the Corrections Corporation of America. One of them was the former head of the Arkansas Department of Corrections, who had been criticized in a federal court decision while he was commissioner for trying to run the Arkansas prison system as if it were going to turn a profit. This was also the era of the plantation prison in Arkansas, where literally you had black men tending fields under the watchful eye of overseers, under the aegis of the criminal justice system. And then there were two other men who were just businessmen who had strong connections with the Reagan administration and an ideological commitment to the privatization of public services. So they managed to use those connections to get a contract to hold undocumented immigrants in Texas. And they actually, until a couple of years ago, they had this story in a video on the website where the two founders are chuckling about this. They didn't own a prison or a detention center at the time. They were driving around late at night trying to figure out how they were going to fulfill the terms of the contract. And they ended up settling on the idea of leasing a motel, surrounding it with concertina wire, and locking everybody in their rooms. That was the birth of the modern private prison industry. It is not a story of innovation. It is not a story of anything other than the combination of ideology and connections. Over the next 20 years, the private prison industry continued to grow because of that combination of ideology and connections. And every time a state legislature or Congress passed a new mandatory minimum, passed a new extreme sentencing law, they grew. Every time that a former BOP director left federal service in order to work for millions of dollars for the private prison industry and help them garner more contracts, the industry grew. So that is the story of this industry, and it's something that is intimately connected, not with, with connections and with decisions that policymakers have made. We need to start undoing those decisions.
Please.
I just want to add a part where I think that it actually got a jolt, if you will, in the 80s with the influx of cocaine and drugs in these inner cities, flooding into these communities during the Reagan era. A lot of cutbacks, a lot of things that were happening in our community. Young people driven towards the whole drug game and selling drugs on the street. That whole thing became popularized almost. Right after that, you had Rockefeller drug laws in the middle of that. This whole war on drugs, as a part of that sent hundreds and thousands of young people into jail, and addicts at the same time into jail, which I think got a jolt, a kind of economic jolt of folks flooding into the system, which kind of, to me, put it on the stock market and allowed more people to invest in it to get it to where it's at in this bigger kind of state today, where it's almost this kind of behemoth that we have not been able really to figure out how to stop.
We'll go right down your line.
I'm not going to argue with him. I'm just going to keep adding. So I think the other piece is there's a continuum around this. There are a lot of people that benefit from this system, right? And it's not just the for-profit side, right? There are people who work, there's corrections officers, there's probation officers, there's a whole, just spectrum of jobs that are connected to the prison industrial complex, right? Whether it's private or not private. And we need to be honest about that, because I will tell you, some of the work that we've done in Florida around school to prison pipeline, we've gotten pushback from correctional and probation officers around not sending kids into the juvenile justice system for really stupid things. But you can imagine that they see, just like coal miners see, that at some point I might be written out of a job because I'm not going to have bodies coming through the system, right? And that add to that, this starts with that interaction with the cop, right? And then it goes all the way from the cop to the judge, to the prosecutor, to the DA, the prosecutor, to the judge. And so it continues on. And so it feels like at each part of it, we could stop this part over here, right? And we can change these laws over here, but then there's all this stuff in the middle, right? Because I know that if we don't stop, we don't figure out this cop thing, right? We could change all the sentencing laws. They're still going to be banging our heads and killing us. And so it's got to be like the whole damn system, right, that we are looking at.
The only small thing I want to add, I don't know that we can lose sight of this, of what the Academy did to young people when they labeled young black men as super predators. And that really fueled the hysteria among prosecutors, among police, among the general public. You know, there was a professor at Princeton who labeled them as super predators and said that they were godless, that they were fatherless, motherless, had no regard for human life, and it was just simply not true. And he later recanted that. But after he recanted, the damage had already been done. There have been so many black and brown kids that were locked up based on that particular narrative, and that certainly fueled the private prison population as well.
If I could just add to the mayor's point and Judith's point, 93% of drug cases in this country take a plea. 93% take a plea. Right, so when you the connection between policy and private prisons, I think is very important. What the mayor was talking about, because if you have these racist, draconian drug laws that scare the heck out of a young person, says you're going to do 25 to life on 4 grams of coke, that I could do 18 months in a plea bargain. I'm not doing 25 to life. I'm going to take that 18 months. And we know once you do 18, the next time around I could do 3 years. Then I could do 7. Then all of a sudden they're doing 25 to life. Right? So those policies, and when you have a system and a state that has a signed contract that says you have to give me prisoners, you have no interest to change those policies. So I think the courage, Congresswoman, of you to take on this issue, because we talk about criminal justice on so many levels, but this specific issue around profiting for prison is so courageous because you're cutting into, as Judith said, the basis of white supremacy, of capitalism. That's right. This country was not built on capitalism. This country was built on slavery. Right. We need to make that distinction, Mayor, and we know there's a difference. And we're continuing to build this country on modern day slavery with this prison system. So I do want to make, that point that that policy is critical when we talk about private prisons.
Absolutely.
That's good.
And if I can say one last thing about solutions, so it wasn't from his notes, from solutions, just because I want to offer a solution as well, because Judith's point's a great one. And the Congressional Black Caucus deserves a tremendous amount of credit. In 2009, when the climate bill was in front of the House, the Congressional Black Caucus said we are not going to pass this bill unless jobs for the new economy are given to people from the communities in which these jobs are going to be created in, specifically black communities. These new green jobs, they got 2,000 phone calls to members of Congress, and they got that piece of legislation put into that climate bill. So we think about closing prisons. We have to offer a solution. Right. I would say let's build green jobs, let's build factories in these rural communities, in these suburban communities, and employ people who are working at the prisons in these new factories. So investment from government into green jobs, so these folks don't lose their jobs, they're not going to fight against us, and we give them an outlet to continue to pursue their careers and their livelihoods.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any audience questions yet? I'll start here. Yes.
One, two, 1, 2.
Just speak loudly. Yeah.
I have more of a statement and also probably a question at the end.
Can't hear.
Do you want to use
Speak
those?
loudly.
Yeah, come here.
Yes, I will. Yes, my name is Eric Young. I'm the Council President, Locals National President. I actually represent 33,000 of the 39,000 federal correctional workers inside of the Department of Justice Federal Bureau of Prisons. I think I was speaking to the Congresswoman's husband in the back of the room. I mentioned this before, that I could speak from not only the professional side of law enforcement, but I also could empathize with those in our communities who have actually went to prison. I was actually 15 years old when my brother, 1 year younger than me, was sentenced as an adult at the age of 14. And he was actually sentenced under a mandatory minimum prison sentence. And that is the subsequent story of each of my brothers that was younger than me, all of us 1 year apart. All of them served mandatory minimum prison sentences in the state of Florida. Many of them have actually were not given programs inside prisons. So I could definitely understand the need for criminal justice reform, the draconian mandatory minimum prison sentences that was actually described. And as the national president, that was one of my first order of business. And I actually held a press conference at the Washington, D.C. Press Club calling for sentence reform. We have a lot of first-time nonviolent offenders, and me being a correctional officer, coming from that circumstance, working in Bureau of Prisons for 22 years, I've seen the unnecessary incarceration of many people, mothers, fathers, who were just incarcerated just because they would not snitch on their son, even though their son was living in a home, et cetera. So I come from that circumstance. And just as a recent, I just spoke to my national president, J. David Cox, to see whether or not we could develop a roundtable, as you have observed in the news, with key people who actually called for criminal justice reform. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, who's the first African American in his respective position. For former director of the Bureau of Prisons, Charles Samuels, who vowed not to ever go work for private prisons. And myself, as the first African American in my respective position, I believe that if we allied with stakeholders, and I truly believe everyone up here at this panel today is a stakeholder, and also with key legislators like yourself, Congresswoman, I truly believe that we could begin a dialogue, and I could actually do some things on my part. I actually meet with executive branch of government at the Department of Justice, as I actually just met with the Deputy Attorney General on the elimination of private prisons. But that was one of my primary goal as the council president, was to eliminate private prisons, and I think we're there now. But it actually starts with criminal justice reform. And the bill seemed to have stalled on Capitol Hill. And anything that I could do in the interim, particularly working with ACLU and things, I'm asking you guys to bring the Council of Prison Locals, AFG, in the room. There are some things that I could do in the interim to sit at the table with you, to actually modify policies, modify federal regulations, and to actually be a spokesperson, in essence, for the roundtable with the individuals who I deal with on the executive branch. Criminal justice reform would have never occurred if I had not endorsed criminal justice reform as a law enforcement officer. And that is very key. If you notice, when we did that, many of the legislators, the conservative legislators, all of a sudden had the courage to come forth. And that's what I'm basically saying today.
Excuse me, I'm going to be just a little bit
I am.
cognizant of time.
I
so,
am.
okay.
I am.
Okay.
Let me just conclude with this. Eric Holder stated that we're a nation of cowards for failing to deal with race. I think we're a nation of cowards that failed to deal with criminal justice reform. It is affecting the family, the unit of family. And that's what America is made up of. And I stated this before. It's a moral issue that prisoners go inside prisons to pay for punishment, and yet they get outside of the prison walls and fences, and they're still walking around with a scarlet letter on their chest. We have to start, and I think Cory Booker is one of the key stakeholders that could be at a round table that is already dealing with very conservative members in Congress on this issue of ban the box and those things like that. And those are things that I really want to work with people, key leaders, and such as yourself, Congresswoman. And
Yeah,
absolutely.
please.
And
Thank you.
the only question that I have is just make sure that we are able to prevent people from coming to prison in the first place. And I was one of those products of those systems of a Scared Straight program. And we have to get back to putting those resources back in place.
Thank you.
And that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this whole issue of reform, it is a spectrum. It starts in elementary school. We need to be doing something there. Then we need to be doing something in middle school. Then in high school. Then as we become young men and women, we've got stuff to do. We are at a very important juncture. We have the discussion of criminal justice reform on the table. But let us not rush to have anything. Because as long as you have mandatory sentencing, and as long as you have enhancements on new crimes, that's not reform. And so all the good intentions with everybody to get criminal justice reform, we need to make sure that we're not moving sideways, we are moving forward. And if the only way conservatives will come on board is if we have enhanced sentencing, Mayor, and we have new mandatory minimums, then let us fight this another day at another time.
That's why we need you down there. That's why we like you down there.
So do we have another question here? Okay.
Hi, my name is Manolia Charlton. I'm with the Media Consortium. We're a network of 80 independent media outlets, and many of them have written amazing investigative stories, including The Nation, Mother Jones, Democracy Now!, list goes on. So we've been covering this issue for a very, very long time. We're about to have our conference in a couple of months, and we're going to attack money in politics. We want to add this issue to that track. So what I'd like for you all, maybe afterward, is if I can speak to you about what is the next story that independent media, because we pushed mainstream media. So what's the next angle of stories that we should be investigating to move this issue forward in the public dialogue?
Does someone want to take that?
After. She said after,
She
right?
said after.
After?
I thought she said
She'll
after.
do it after? Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Greg. I moved here about a year ago from California, and I have a friend of mine, his name is William Abrams. He's the #1 billing partner at law firms in Silicon Valley, but he also bills like 600 hours a year of hours focused primarily with the Southern Poverty Law Center regarding people who are, my understanding of the situation is that for people who are headed towards death row, they give them an hour and a half of legal assistance where they make the decision between, what their plea is going to be, and that's all the legal help they get. So as a result, you have a number of people who've taken a plea, not because they're guilty, but just because they didn't have the money for legal representation. So I just wanted to review the fact that he was doing all those hours on a pro bono basis, and he's attached to Stanford Law School, and that those students and those concerned professionals are definitely putting a lot of hours in to actually provide legal representation to people who are sort of suffering mostly in the South, where they're given an hour of legal counsel, and during that period you can't really defend or prepare a case. And I just think it's an important issue that I think some government money needs to be put up to allow there to be more than 1 hour representation in that capacity. Thank you.
So actually, one of the things Republicans did as they were passing all these draconian criminal justice laws was that they cut funding for legal services. So both on the civil side and the criminal side, and not only did they cut it, but they also put restrictions on it so that they couldn't do lobbying, for example. So they can't weigh in on things, so that they couldn't do class action lawsuits. And so we have to understand, for those of us who are, conspiracy theorists, right? A lot of black folks are, right? Let's put the dots together, right, of how all of these things kind of worked in tandem to get us to where we are, with people who can't, don't have a lawyer, take a plea, in fact, before then can't pay the bond, right? And then get locked up because you couldn't pay the little bond, even if it's $5 or whatever it is, right? Then get jailed. Then we have the prison system that gets, so all of those pieces seem to have come together just around the same time, right? And I would submit probably not a coincidence.
I also wanted to add, and I'll be very brief so everyone has an opportunity, is the pension conversation. A lot of our pensions are also invested in the system. And that is our true power. So if you think about it, we have workers that have contributed to their pensions that then the pension system says, well, we have to invest on what makes money. And what makes money is prisons. So we have to also look into our cities and our municipalities and ask, where are we investing our dollars? New York City just voted to divest from prisons, and that was a huge. But again, and I just want to acknowledge my colleague from New York City, Jumaane Williams, who has done a lot of work on reform also. So it's also about challenging and having, asking our union representatives, our pensions, where is our money being invested, and whether we unknowingly are supporting the system also.
Right.
Yeah, on the public defender's point, I think on the one hand, it is great that private attorneys are taking their time and effort to defend people in criminal proceedings, but this is something that it should be state funded. And for every, Judith said, yes, there is a reason that things are the way they are. There is a reason why in Louisiana right now the public defenders are so underfunded and overburdened that there is a crisis in public defense where they're literally pulling attorneys who do tax cases off to try and defend people in criminal cases. And it's not just public defense that's underfunded, it is the alternatives to the criminal justice system, where we no longer have a mental health system in this country except for prisons and jails. We don't have systems apart from the criminal justice system to deal with issues of drug addiction and abuse. And that's something that needs to be part of this conversation, to talk about how we can fund the important parts of the criminal justice system that are underfunded, but also to fund the programs that will meet people's needs and prevent them from entering the criminal justice system in the first place.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since I have the gray hair in the room, I can remember back many, many years ago, and the conversation, 10 or 15 minutes ago, how did we get here? Her talk about 1980. Well, before there was President Reagan, there was Governor Reagan. Mm-hmm. The first thing he did as governor was dismantle the state mental health operations, the public operations in the state of California. Once he became president, he started dismantling, from top to bottom, all the way through. He pushed very hard. Government is the enemy. Get rid of government. Make it be where you can drown it in the bathtub, as they talk frequently about. Now, government is good. Good government is good. We've got a very large government in this country, but it is a contract, for-profit, for-sale government that started shortly after 1980. So I won't say which president kind of brought that, but I think we all that are old enough to remember 1980 know who brought that. Get rid of government, sell government off, and everybody make a lot of money off of selling government off. So how do we get there? We've got to get back to strong mental health, prevention of mental health, working with children. Step one, we've got to have those preschool programs, all of those type opportunities, educational opportunities. The list goes on and on. By the time someone's going to prison, it's too late at that point to make the big difference. We need to be preventative and spend that money. We need to get back to having good government in this country that serves the American people.
So if someone, you have a question?
Yes.
Because I have a follow-up. Have your question first and then I'll follow up.
Okay, my name is Rosalind Scarborough. I'm the president of the San Fernando Valley in California, NAACP, and we are committed to trying to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline within our area. I'm going to put this in the point of a question, even though I kind of have an idea what the answer is, but when someone plea bargains, isn't that an automatic conviction? And if so, a lot of people don't really understand that. You have a lot of the public defenders who are overwhelmed and keep pushing for that. Is there a simple solution, I'm thinking, would be to differentiate between whether or not someone plea bargained their way into prison or were actually convicted as a starting point. There's many layers that we have to work on, but that's one that at least can kind of decriminalize some of what people are dealing with.
Who wants to do that?
There's a lot of attorneys here.
There's well, like looking at you. Go ahead. You play one on TV.
I was a theater
on
major.
Twitter.
So I would say, they know better, but I think that the plea bargain is the mandatory minimum sentencing is what created the plea bargain, right? And drug sentencing. So to me, my opinion, to dismantle the mass incarceration hysteria is get rid of the mandatory minimums. I think the Congressman is right. Don't let them add new ones. The second piece in that is the DA should not have discretion on sentencing. It should be the judges. Right. So we have to remove discretion from all DAs in sentencing. It should be in the hand of the judge. A judge should have the ability to hand down a sentence. When the DA has discretion, then the DA is sitting there in front of a young kid and saying, it's in my hands. Whether you like it or not, you're doing 15 to life and take 18 months. So the DAs are fighting, but we have good ones. Kim Foxx in Chicago, Ken Thompson in Brooklyn, right? There's a new wave of DAs. They're looking at this a very different approach. So I think we also have to, as Judith said, the first interaction on sentencing with the criminal justice system is the DA. That's the first interaction a young person has, or any person has, is with the DA. And so I think if we looked at the DA system and try to dismantle that system, we have a good chance of getting rid of these draconian drug laws.
And for DAs, like we as a community, we haven't really been holding them accountable until very recently, right? Like, you have an incumbent who runs and you just keep like voting for him, right? And you don't even know what they're doing. You know that your whole family's in prison, but you don't know, like, but you're not thinking about like, okay, well, I could actually change it by the way that I vote. And often they run unopposed also, right? And so you've got places where the Buy Anita campaign in Chicago, like she didn't just go because of nothing. It was because there was some heat in the streets. And for a number of years on what was happening in Chicago. Angela Corey, who botched the Zimmerman case, down in Florida, now gone, right? But this is, which is great, right? But then there's gonna be somebody else who comes in her place. And so how are we making sure that we hold them accountable? But part of that is us also dreaming about what this system should look like or should not look like, right? So that we have an idea of what we want to hold them accountable on. Do they have diversionary programs? Are they doing things around plea bargains versus other things? Plea bargains often happen also because of the cop. Right? People get questioned and scared into making statements that then the lawyer gets and says, well, looks like you should take a plea bargain. So again, it's like a continuum of this system, right? And us finding ways at each point to hold them accountable, and that's going to take place through voting, but it's also going to take place through all of the kinds of campaigns, the shutting it down in different places, all of what we know is movement that has created change that got us off of plantations to a black man in the White House is the stuff that we have to continue to do to hold this system accountable.
You said it best. The voting. I want to thank the ACLU In my old legislative district, I would have lost votes for saying that. But I want to say, I got to thank the ACLU. And I want to tell you why. And we talked about the Sixth Amendment right to counsel when you're arrested. And in my home state of Louisiana, we thought we'd reform the indigent defense system in 2007, and we never funded it. We changed the system, but we didn't fund it. And so you guys, after seeing countless and countless people, poor black and poor white people, sit in jail for misdemeanors, waiting for a lawyer to be appointed to them, breaking families, causing them to lose their jobs.
Right.
The ACLU had the wherewithal, the gumption to come in and file a lawsuit and say the whole system is unconstitutional. When I talked about voting earlier and I said it can't just be voting, I was serious. I want you to vote. But sometimes that isn't enough. Doesn't mean you stop. You keep voting, but sometimes it takes action. And so I wanted to thank you, Carl and ACLU, for continuing to fight the good fight, even when it's not always the popular fight. Because the Sixth Amendment, I tell my conservative friends, the Constitution doesn't stop at the Second Amendment. Right? And just like they fight for their right to bear arms, they should fight for your ability to have a council, because that was written into the Constitution, into the Bill of Rights. Right? And so we got to push them. We've got to push them. But thank you, Carl. Thank the folks at the ACLU for always standing up for folks.
Thank you.
That wasn't in your notes, was it?
Do you have a question? Yeah. First? Okay. Yeah.
I have kind of a question slash statement slash proposal all in one. My name is Victor
We're going to make
Ferguson.
it a fast question
Okay,
statement.
yeah. I'll wrap it up. So yeah, my name is Victor Ferguson. I'm co-owner of Goshen in Hyattsville, Maryland. And I push healthy food and healthy living, healthy lifestyle. But what I wanted to propose is that as far as the criminals that come out from the prison and they can't find an alternative means to provide for themselves, for their families, and to be able to get free of whatever situation that they had, because with the Constitution, it states when you break a law, you become a slave for the most part. So with that being the case, as far as harsh penalties, they should actually have a training for them growing, because I feel like it's a need as far as food deserts for different farms, little organic farms within the neighborhoods, so they can provide these neighborhoods with organic foods. And they're also able to go to the farmers market. They're able to make money for themselves. They're able to learn that trade, and it kind of decriminalizes an old school criminal mind. Because he can either come out and he can be a mastermind within what he knew how to do and what landed him in prison in the first place, or he can do something legit that people respect and is also needed within a neighborhood. So, yeah. What do y'all think?
That's good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Do it.
Do you want to take it? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it's a very good-
I think it's especially important to have job opportunities for people who are coming out of prison, because being somebody with a felony record, that is one of the only situations where you have no protections. Once you check that box on the application, it doesn't matter what your felony was. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. It doesn't matter whether it's even related to the job responsibilities. The process can just end there. And that's why, ban the box is important, but also making sure that people have jobs that are accessible in the neighborhoods that they're returning to.
Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Eaton, and this issue pretty much weighs on me. It's a personal issue for me because I have someone, a close friend, who's serving time in prison. He's up in Easton Correctional Facility in New York, and he talks about how the water that they have to drink, shower with, is totally brown. There are no vegetables served in the prison. And I hear voting as one of the solutions, and the ACL as an entity working on some of these issues. But as a private citizen, what are some other solutions that we can take in our own hands to work on this issue?
Yeah. Can I add to your question? That was one of my follow-ups. Her question, but also this idea about the cycle of fees that are happening. I just want to add to what you're saying, the cycle of fees, and also this idea of the mental health. If you could, with her question around those topics.
Well, I mean, I'll add from
Yeah,
my
please,
perspective.
yeah.
One, I mean, just there are a lot of things that we should be doing, by the way, and I think this discussion should always boil back down to inequity. And we never get there. We always talk about all these other kinds of things, but we never get to the idea of, inequity. That's why I started off with the 13th Amendment, because I wanted to make upfront slavery, white supremacy, inequity as the foundation for all of this. But at the end of the day, the fees, which of course are important to municipalities like Newark. I mean, there are cities that constantly get fees from people who violate the law. And you saw how imbalanced that was in Ferguson. People were actually being stopped and pulled over for these fees. And I know in Newark, there are fees that are created, whether you're talking about disorderly fees, or we have what we call blue tickets, right? That police give to individuals when they violate the law, or traffic stops that create fees, and also adds to this kind of prison industrial complex, the constantly feeding of people into a system who can't pay the fees. So ultimately, there are a couple of things that we're doing. One is we have a community court in the city. It's the only community court in the entire state of New Jersey, probably one of the rarest ones in the country for that matter. Our municipal chief judge, Judge Pratt, who I appointed, by the way, is doing a lot around the community court, which allows her the opportunity to waive these fees and use alternative kinds of sentencing and opportunities for people who obviously cannot afford it, or the cases. So that we get beat up a lot for, you grab people who are in prostitution or folks that are panhandling, because when they see that, they automatically think we're putting them in jail and they'll get 50 years. But we have a community court that allows us the opportunity to force people or push people into all kinds of things, from counseling. I mean, I went to the court, they have people writing essays in there, right? So it's all kinds of things that are happening in the community court that kind of allows you to go away from the regular progress of what the process usually is. Bail, put you in jail, wait for trial, from something as small as a disorderly conduct, spitting on a sidewalk, cursing at an officer, all kinds of things like that you get. Then New Jersey is undergoing bail reform. Probably the first state that's undergoing bail reform in the country. There's a lot of pros and cons to that, but the pro side is that it flips the bail system on its head. Before, you had to, they could give you a bail, then you have to argue in court whether the bail is too high or whether you need a bail. So it's actually the opposite. There is no bail, and you have to go to the court and fight to get the person a bail. Everybody will be released on their own recognizance. In fact, you can only stay up in jail for 48 hours until you have to go to court and they say whether you get a bail or not. The great thing about that is that you can no longer get a warrant for a traffic ticket where they can lock you up, the bail for that is ridiculous, or all these small bails all go away. On the other side, of course, if you shot 3 or 4 people, you also have the same opportunity that everybody else does. You get released on your own recognizance, and it's up to the courts to be able to defend that or keep you in jail with a bail, or give you no bail at all. So there's some discussions around that, but I think that we need to be involved in that. It's coming out of the courts in the state of New Jersey, and it's not really pushed. It's not a legislative thing or not something that's coming from the elected officials. It's coming from the courts, and in January, as a matter of fact, is when this thing is getting ready to hit the ground. So
I wanted to add that as the individual, I think that one of the things that we have to get beyond is so voting is incredibly important, but it's the after the vote also.
The advocacy.
So you'd be surprised, that legislators, city council people, et cetera, if they get some emails from people, we don't usually connect with our, maybe people that come to CBC, ALC do, but a lot of people don't typically, let me just shoot off an email to my council member about this issue, right?
Agreed, yeah.
And if they get 10 on one issue, for a lot of them, that's there's a movement out there, because they're not used to getting it. And so I think part of what we have to do is, like we have to, especially for our family members who are incarcerated, too often they don't have a voice because they're in a cage. And we have to organize our families sometimes to speak for them, right? To be able to tell that story of what is happening to them while they're behind bars, and to be able to give that voice. Now, I'm not saying that they actually do have power, because we know there was just a strike across the country. We know Attica. I mean, like so they have a voice, right? But sometimes those of us who are left behind back home also have to raise our voices on their behalf. And so those little emails, getting 10 people from your family to email about an issue, I think can help push some change.
So, did you have a
That's
follow-up?
actually where I wanted to go with this.
Okay.
Yeah, because you talked about something like quality of water, that drinkable water. Well, we know that's an issue, right? Flint, Michigan. So if you send a letter to anybody on that issue, it'll get some attention. But there are constituent services units within the congressional member who represents your individual. Also, even within state government, the governor's office, they need to hear the complaint. That's a very serious complaint. And they need to hear it from every member of your family so that they recognize, and anybody else you can tap in church, send it. Because that is a way that you will garner some attention for the issue. So maybe Congress wouldn't be able to do anything in that situation because of a particular prison, but a letter from a congressman or congresswoman, or a letter from your U.S. senator, or a letter to your governor will get somebody's attention, and maybe perhaps a change can occur there. Thank you.
Okay. And I think, Don, did you want to follow up? And then I think we have time for 2 more questions. One-ish question? Okay. All right.
I just wanted to say the same thing. Don't ever underestimate the power of one person starting an advocacy, getting with your family, getting some people together, emailing, calling. There's never been an easier time in our technology to be an advocate. So don't ever underestimate that. Don't think you have to be the senator to get it done. You can get a lot done, just you. And bringing, like you said, bringing those personal stories. Our prisoners are getting punished in jail when they raise those issues. And so we have to do it for them.
And I'll be 15 seconds. I think the other component that I wanted to add is we have public hearings on legislation. And so often I'm in hearings where we'll have 3 or 4 people testify when it's an issue that affects every New Yorker or everyone in the state. So we also have to be cognizant, and I know that sometimes they could be at an inconvenient time, but even just watching them online because they're live streamed, and being able to shoot an email to your elected official makes a difference, because at least people are aware that constituents are paying attention. And so many of these bills, so many of these laws are signed in the middle, I don't want to say in the middle of the night, but we try to be as transparent as possible. But if the community isn't present in some of these hearings and explain, and it doesn't always have to be because you don't support it. Sometimes we also need it when you support it, because maybe not all of our colleagues support it. So if we show strength in numbers from our community, that helps us as elected officials tremendously.
We have one.
Yeah, I have a comment. Okay. I'm Dr. Gloria Manley. I'm a psychiatrist. And I apologize, I came in late, but I heard a comment that when I was walking in the door about mental health, and there not being mental health, or there's been some changes in this country. A little bit on my credentials. Currently, I practice telepsychiatry, and I'm active in 3 states, California, Arizona, and North Carolina. I'm also part-time employed with the Department of Juvenile Corrections in the state of Arizona. I have worked and started the telepsychiatry program for the Department of Corrections in the state of California. I have an inactive license in the state of New York.
All right. Let's get it active.
Okay, so the comment that I wanted to make was about mental health, because currently I'm split between the community, working in the telepsychiatry in California, Arizona, and North Carolina, and